Something happened in deep space just a few hours ago that scientists around the world are still struggling to explain. Not because it is rare, not because it is unusual, but because, according to everything we understand about physics, it should be impossible. It is the 15th of March, 2026. Exactly 4 hours ago, at 9:14 UTC, NASA's Deep Space Network, working together with the James Webb Space Telescope, confirmed an event that has a statistical probability of natural occurrence effectively equal to 0. In astrophysics, we usually speak carefully. We say something is unlikely, or we call it a statistical anomaly. But what just happened with the object known as 3I, Atlas, doesn't fit those words. What we saw was something far stranger, a clean, geometric separation. For the past 6 months, astronomers have been tracking 3I, Atlas, as a single, stable object moving through the solar system. Its trajectory had been mapped, its rotation measured, its structure analyzed through spectroscopy. Everything about it looked like a typical cometary body, a mixture of ice, rock, and frozen gases drifting through space. But at exactly 9:14 UTC, that changed. The object did not crumble, it did not shatter into chaotic dust and ice, which is what normally happens when a comet breaks apart under solar stress. Instead, something entirely different occurred. The body separated into 7 distinct fragments. 7. At first glance, that might not sound extraordinary. Celestial bodies break apart all the time. Tidal forces, heating from the sun, and collisions can all cause fragmentation events. But the way this separation happened immediately raised questions. The fragments didn't scatter randomly. They didn't tumble away in chaotic directions. They separated cleanly, almost like components being released from a larger structure. And then the real surprise appeared in the data. The near-infrared camera on the James Webb Space Telescope detected something that should not exist in empty space. Each of the 7 fragments began emitting a single, isolated electromagnetic frequency. Fragment A radiated at roughly 400 terahertz, a frequency our eyes interpret as deep red. Fragment B emitted around 480 terahertz, corresponding to orange. The third fragment aligned with yellow frequencies. Then green, then blue, indigo, violet. 7 fragments, 7 distinct frequencies. A perfect chromatic sequence unfolding more than 240 million kilometers from Earth. Take a moment to consider what that means. Nature is chaotic. When natural objects break apart, they produce broad spectrums of mixed signals, dust clouds, scattered reflections, and overlapping wavelengths. Nature does not neatly separate a rock into a rainbow. Yet that is exactly what the instruments recorded. 7 objects drifting in formation, each broadcasting a pure, isolated wavelength of light. Many of my colleagues at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics immediately suspected a technical error. That was my first reaction too. Spectroscopy instruments sometimes miscalibrate. Sensors occasionally produce artifacts. It happens. But then the Atacama Large Millimeter Array in Chile independently confirmed the signal. They didn't just detect the visible frequencies, they picked up the radio counterparts as well. Whatever happened at 9:14 UTC was not a sensor glitch, it was real. And the more we examine the data, the stranger the event becomes. Because the separation itself wasn't chaotic at all. It was precise. And that precision raises a question that astrophysicists around the world are now quietly asking themselves tonight. If this wasn't a natural breakup, then what exactly did we just witness? Because the physics of what happened at 9:14 UTC suggests something far more unsettling than a comet splitting apart. To understand why this event is causing such concern, we need to look closely at the physics of how celestial bodies normally break apart. When a comet approaches the Sun or experiences gravitational stress from a large planet like Jupiter, the process is messy. Astronomers often describe comets as dirty snowballs. They are mixtures of ice, rock, and volatile gases. When these materials heat up or experience tidal stress, they fracture irregularly. The result is a chaotic debris cloud containing dust, ice, and rocky fragments moving at different speeds. In spectroscopy, such an event produces what we call a broad spectrum, a noisy mixture of wavelengths scattered across the visual range. But that is not what happened here. 3I. Atlas did not create noise. It created something that looks almost like a prism. At 9:16 UTC, just 2 minutes after the separation, the James Webb Space Telescope turned its near-infrared camera directly toward the fragments. At nearly the same time, the European Space Agency's Euclid telescope aligned its visual sensors with the same coordinates. On the ground, the Keck Observatory in Hawaii locked its adaptive optics and laser guide stars onto the object. 3 independent observation systems, 3 different technologies, 3 identical conclusions. The first fragment, what scientists are now calling alpha, is emitting a perfectly monochromatic signal centered around 460 terahertz. That corresponds to a deep, pure red. But the key detail is this: the signal has no spread. In nature, objects reflecting red light still emit a range of nearby wavelengths. Even a ruby crystal reflects a band of frequencies. Alpha does not. Its signal is razor thin, almost like a laser. The second fragment, beta, drifted precisely 40 kilometers from alpha and began emitting a pure orange frequency. The third fragment settled into a yellow emission band. The pattern continued across green, blue, indigo, and violet. 7 fragments, 7 pure wavelengths. Pause and imagine how unlikely that is. For a natural object made of frozen water, methane, silicates, and organic compounds to break apart and sort its materials by color frequency would be like dropping a glass bottle on the floor and watching the shards arrange themselves into a perfect line sorted by size while simultaneously humming a musical scale. Simulation models currently running at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory estimate the probability of this occurring by chance at less than 1 in 800 trillion. In other words, statistically speaking, it shouldn't happen. Naturally, scientists first searched for a physical explanation. One theory proposed that the comet had released pockets of ionized gas, neon, argon, or helium that could glow under solar radiation, producing different colors like a neon sign. For a brief moment, that seemed plausible. But at 10:45 UTC, the Chandra X-ray Observatory ruled out that possibility completely. Gas clouds disperse quickly in the vacuum of space. They expand and fade. These fragments are not gas. They are solid. Gravitational lensing measurements indicate that each fragment is roughly 1.2 kilometers in diameter. They are dense objects with significant mass, and they are holding their shapes. That means we are looking at 7 solid bodies, each roughly the size of a city block, glowing at a single isolated electromagnetic frequency. And then the movement data made the situation even stranger, because instead of drifting randomly like debris, the fragments appear to be organizing themselves into something that looks disturbingly intentional. Because instead of drifting randomly like debris, the fragments began behaving in a way that immediately caught the attention of every astrophysicist monitoring the data. At 11:30 UTC, the Deep Space Network recorded something that simply does not occur in a normal debris field. The fragments started synchronizing their motion. Normally, when objects break apart in space, each piece tumbles unpredictably. some rotate faster, some slow down, some drift away under gravitational influence or outgassing. It's chaotic. No two fragments behave the same way. But that is not what the instruments recorded. The outermost fragments, alpha, the red emitter, and the violet fragment on the opposite side, suddenly stopped tumbling. Their rotation stabilized at exactly 33.3 minutes per cycle, not approximately, exactly. Then something even stranger happened. The fragments between them, orange, yellow, green, blue, and indigo, began adjusting their positions. They didn't accelerate the way objects do when pushed by gas. They didn't slow due to gravitational drag. Instead, they simply shifted their velocities with an eerie precision, moving into evenly spaced positions. Right now, according to the latest tracking data, the distance between the red fragment and the orange fragment is exactly 6,000 kilometers. Orange to yellow, also 6,000 kilometers. Yellow to green, the same. Every gap across the entire formation is nearly identical, with a margin of error of less than 0.04%. Nature doesn't measure in kilometers. Nature doesn't align debris fields like the gears of a Swiss watch. Yet that is exactly what this object appears to be doing. An hour ago, I spoke with colleagues working at the European Southern Observatory. The atmosphere there wasn't excitement. It wasn't celebration over a strange discovery. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when scientists are staring at data that challenges everything they thought they understood. One of them sent a short message privately. It contained only 5 words. Rocks don't do this. And that simple statement captures the problem perfectly. If this object were truly a comet, it should be fading. Its fragments should be dispersing, losing energy, drifting apart. Instead, the fragments are organizing themselves. They are building a structure that now spans nearly 40,000 kilometers of space. And as researchers continued examining the spectral emissions from the fragments, they realized something else, something that changed the entire interpretation of the event. At exactly 12 UTC, scientists overlaid the 7 frequencies being emitted by the fragments: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Individually, each fragment produces a narrow electromagnetic signal. But when those signals are combined, they create something unexpected. Instead of simply producing white light, the normal result of combining the visible spectrum, they form a structured carrier wave. In other words, this isn't just a rainbow of fragments. It behaves more like a transmission array. The fragments appear to be acting together as a massive phased antenna system, using visible light frequencies as the carrier signal. And once researchers realized that, the next question became unavoidable. If this formation is transmitting something, then where is the signal aimed? Because when scientists traced the orientation of the 7 fragments, they discovered that the formation was not pointing back toward deep space. It wasn't aimed at the sunday. It was aligned towards something much closer. When the trajectory alignment data arrived at 12:45 UTC, my first reaction was disbelief. I called the control team at the Very Large Array in New Mexico and asked them to recalibrate their instruments, because the implication of the data was something that simply isn't taught in conventional astrophysics. The 7 fragments, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, had arranged themselves into a perfect line stretching across 40,000 kilometers. But they weren't just pointing at a location, they were pointing at a frequency, and that is where the physics becomes truly strange. Under classical mechanics, 7 independent objects floating thousands of kilometers apart should behave like isolated systems. If one object changes brightness or motion, the others shouldn't react until information travels between them. Even at the speed of light, That takes time. But at 13:02 UTC, something impossible occurred. The red fragment suddenly pulsed. Its brightness increased by nearly 400%. At that exact same nanosecond, not milliseconds later, not seconds later, the violet fragment, 40,000 kilometers away, dimmed by precisely the same amount. No delay, no light speed lag. The change happened simultaneously. For physicists, this observation immediately triggered one phrase that normally belongs to the strange world of quantum mechanics. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. Today we call it quantum entanglement. If two objects are quantum entangled, changes to one can instantly influence the other, no matter how far apart they are. In laboratories on Earth, maintaining quantum entanglement across even a few meters is extremely difficult. Extending it across kilometers would be revolutionary. But here, we appear to be observing entanglement across 40,000 kilometers in open space. And that level of stability would require engineering far beyond anything humanity currently possesses. Then there is the matter of the frequencies themselves. Researchers began analyzing the electromagnetic signals emitted by the fragments, not just as colors, but as a harmonic system. Imagine sitting at a piano. If you press random keys, the result is noise. But if you strike 7 specific notes that form a harmonic structure like a major chord, the sound waves reinforce each other. They resonate. That is exactly what the 7 fragments appear to be doing. At 14 UTC, the Fermi Gamma-ray Space Telescope detected something forming in the space between the fragments. The overlapping frequencies were producing constructive interference and amplification of energy where the waves intersect. That amplification was so strong that instruments began detecting a localized distortion of spacetime itself. The combined signals were creating what physicists describe as a standing wave. I ran a quick simulation using modeling software at the City University of New York. The result was deeply unsettling. When these exact 7 frequencies combine at the intensities being observed, they don't just produce electromagnetic radiation, they produce what theoretical physics describes as a scalar wave. Scalar waves behave differently from ordinary electromagnetic waves. Instead of oscillating side to side, they compress and expand along the direction of travel. In theory, such waves can pass through matter, planets, even shielding structures without losing strength. And according to the latest readings, 3I, Atlas is generating a scalar field that is growing stronger with every passing hour, which raises a far more serious question. Because if this formation is acting like a massive energy lens, then where exactly is that energy being focused? And the answer to that question is what triggered an emergency briefing in Washington just a short time ago. And the answer to that question is what triggered an emergency briefing in Washington just a short time ago. At 14:15 UTC, scientists finally triangulated the focal point of the energy beam created by the 7 fragments. The scalar wave being produced by the formation was not directed toward Earth's surface. It wasn't aimed at any city, any continent, or any population center. Instead, the beam was aimed precisely at a region surrounding our planet known as the Van Allen radiation belts. For those unfamiliar with them, the Van Allen belts are massive zones of high-energy charged particles trapped by Earth's magnetic field. They form a protective shield around the planet, blocking much of the dangerous radiation carried by the solar wind. Without them, life on Earth would face far greater exposure to cosmic radiation. When scientists realized the beam from 3I, Atlas, was intersecting the outer Van Allen belt at an altitude of roughly 20,000 kilometers, the immediate fear was that the formation might be attacking our planet's natural defenses. But the initial data didn't show damage. Instead, It showed resonance. Think of a wine glass sitting on a table. If you tap it lightly, it vibrates and produces a soft ringing sound. But if you strike it with the exact resonant frequency that matches the structure of the glass, the vibrations amplify until the glass shatters. The beam from 3I, Atlas, appeared to be doing something similar. It was not blasting the Van Allen belts with brute force. It was interacting with them at a precise frequency. At 1430 UTC, magnetometers stationed in Alaska and Norway recorded something extraordinary. The Earth's magnetic field began oscillating. The reading spiked beyond normal levels. The planet itself was beginning to vibrate. Even more unsettling, the frequency of that vibration matched the mathematical average of the 7 colors emitted by the fragments. Pause for a moment and consider the chain of events. An object enters our solar system. It separates into 7 fragments that organize themselves into a perfect formation. Each fragment emits a specific color frequency. Those frequencies combine into a harmonic signal. That signal interacts with Earth's magnetic shield and causes it to resonate like a vibrating instrument. It's almost as if the planet itself has become part of the system. But the situation grew even stranger. At 15 UTC, data from an unexpected source entered the picture, the Global Consciousness Project. This project operates a worldwide network of random number generators placed in laboratories across more than 60 countries. Normally, these machines produce completely random sequences of numbers. However, during major global events, moments when millions of people experience intense emotional focus, the data sometimes shows subtle deviations from randomness. At exactly 15 UTC, as the resonance between 3I, Atlas, and the Van Allen belts reached its peak, every one of those random number generators began deviating simultaneously across 65 countries. The statistical probability of that happening by chance was calculated at 10 billion to 1. The machines were no longer producing noise, they were producing patterns. And when researchers compared those patterns to the frequencies emitted by the fragments in space, the signals matched perfectly, which meant the influence of the scalar wave was no longer confined to the magnetosphere. It had reached the surface of Earth, and possibly even further, because the next discovery suggested the signal was interacting with something far more personal. Because the next discovery suggested the signal was interacting with something far more personal than the planet's magnetic field. Shortly after the random number generators synchronized, researchers began examining data from sleep laboratories and neurological monitoring centers around the world. At approximately 15:05 UTC, EEG brainwave monitors at 3 major hospitals recorded an unusual spike in gamma wave activity among patients in deep REM sleep. The frequency of those spikes matched the emission frequency of the indigo fragment almost perfectly. At the same time, scattered reports began appearing from people who were awake. Headaches, a faint humming sound, a sensation of pressure in the head or ears. Individually, these symptoms might have been dismissed as coincidence, but when the timing was compared with the astronomical data, the pattern became difficult to ignore. The signal from 3I, Atlas, wasn't just interacting with Earth's magnetic shield. It appeared to be influencing electrical systems across the planet, random number generators, electrical grids, and possibly even the neurons inside the human brain. The fragments were acting like tuning forks, and everything on Earth seemed to be vibrating in response. At that moment, the central question shifted dramatically. Scientists were no longer asking what this object was. They were asking why it was synchronizing our planet. Then, at 1510 UTC, something happened that changed the entire interpretation of the event. The violet fragment, the highest energy emitter in the formation, suddenly went dark. For 1 second, its signal disappeared completely. Then, it pulsed again. But the new signal was not electromagnetic. Instruments at the Laser Interferometer, Gravitational Wave Observatory, LIGO, detected a rhythmic pulse unlike anything previously observed. It resembled a heartbeat, and its frequency was exactly 7.83 Hz. For geophysicists, that number is deeply familiar. 7.83 Hz is known as the Schumann resonance, the fundamental electromagnetic frequency of the Earth itself. It is sometimes described as the natural heartbeat of our planet. In other words, the object in space had tuned itself to the exact resonance of Earth's biosphere. At the same time, the 7 fragments stopped drifting apart and locked into a rigid, hexagonal formation spanning roughly 40,000 kilometers. They were no longer moving randomly. They were holding position against the solar wind with a force that implied active propulsion. And inside that hexagon, something began to form. Images from Hubble's Wide Field camera revealed that the center of the formation was no longer empty space. Light from distant stars passing behind it appeared distorted. The fragments were feeding energy toward a single point in the middle of the structure. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and indigo frequencies converged inward while the violet fragment pulsed the Schumann resonance outward toward Earth. The combined effect was producing a rapidly increasing concentration of energy in the center. According to current calculations, that energy density has already crossed the theoretical threshold required to destabilize the vacuum of space itself, which suggests something extraordinary may be forming there. Not a signal, not a weapon, but possibly a bridge. A bridge to where? We do not yet know. Right now, scientists monitoring the live feed from the European Space Agency are watching the center of the formation grow brighter. The light emerging from it is not reflected sunlight. It is being generated from within the distortion itself. And the color of that light does not correspond to any wavelength visible to the human eye. Whatever is forming there appears to operate at a frequency our universe was never meant to show us. The formation is complete. The synchronization has finished. And whatever is emerging through the center of that structure is now beginning to arrive. If you want to stay updated on this unfolding cosmic mystery and explore more discoveries about our universe, make sure to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next.